Welcome back. This is our final lecture on epistemology, the theory of knowledge. So, bringing us up to sort of the 20th century here, there's much more to be said. And if you want to take a course in epistemology, those are offered here. Back in summer session 2. There is one till 132. So, feel free to take it if you find it interesting. So, this is just sort of like, again, getting us from Descartes up to roughly where the world where people are talking about this stuff now in contemporary philosophy, right? So big fast forward, right? Early 1600s in France. Now we're in the early 1960s in the United States. Edmund Gettier, right? Who at the time he's a professor at a U.S. university, good reputation, great reputation for teaching, but just has not really published any papers in journals, right? Um, and that is usually part of your job as a professor, right? So he's being pressured to look. You got to publish something, Ed. Come on. And so he finally does. So he just writes this little 3-page paper, which is very, very short for a philosophy paper. And I don't know if he's embarrassed or what. He doesn't even publish it in English initially. He has it translated into Spanish and publishes it in a Spanish language journal. Well, the article makes it back into English, right? Back into some uh, well-known journals in the United States and the English-speaking world, and it revolutionizes sort of contemporary epistemology for at least a few decades, right? People are concerned. There's a whole sort of literature on what has become known as the Gettier problem. So in this lecture, we're going to introduce the Gettier problem. It's likely that again, you're welcome to write your paper on any topic, but I'm going to provide some prompts if you're really having trouble coming up with a topic, and probably one of the prompts will be on the Gettier problem. It seems to be one that students often like to write on. Okay, so we are no longer in the world of foundationalism, right? Descartes' epistemology, where everything had to be grounded in some unshakable knowledge. Contemporary account around this time of the 60s, what we mean by knowledge has sort of been weakened, right? And I think it more accurately reflects the way we use the term knowledge in everyday language, right? For example, I know my car is in the parking lot right now, right? There's my Rolls Royce, right, which I purchased on my lavish salary as an academic, and it's there in the parking lot right now where I left it, right? I can say, even though I'm not looking at it right now, most of you would say, yeah, I know where my car is parked. It's parked in the lot, right? Now, of course, obviously possible that I'm mistaken about that. It could have been stolen right in the last 30 minutes, the last hour since I last saw it. Even though that possibility exists, right? Even though it's not sort of like unshakable in the way that Descartes meant the word knowledge, right, to entail, most of us, using the contemporary English word knowledge would say, yeah, you know your car is in the parking lot, right? Even if it's possible that you're mistaken. And I can also say I know my car's in the parking lot without somehow being able to trace that knowledge back to some unshakable foundation of like, right, I know I exist and I know God exists and therefore, and so on, right? So it's again, a different sense of word knowledge, a different account of epistemology, theory of knowledge. Right? And, Descartes likely wouldn't like it. He would say, no, that's not real knowledge, right? Um, and you can have a reasonable debate, right? About what knowledge should mean. Um, but I think it's safe to say that this sort of weaker version of knowledge, where I can say I know my car's in the parking lot right now, is a bit closer to the way we actually use it in the English language. So at the time Gettier is writing, the generally accepted analysis of what the word knowledge means is justified true belief. So I'm going to get into sort of details of what each of those three things mean. So it's commonly known as the JTB account of knowledge, right? There's sort of three things that need to be satisfied, and if those three things are satisfied, right? So belief, right? We'll start with belief. What is a belief, right? Knowledge is a kind of belief, and a belief is a sort of mental state, right? So it's a specific kind of mental state. It's the kind of mental state you have that can be true or false. So there's all kinds of different sorts of mental states you might have. For example, one kind is a desire, right? So I can want there to be leftover pizza in the fridge, right? And that desire is a perfectly good desire, whether or not there actually is pizza in the fridge, right? It's just an expression of, again, what I want, right? Beliefs are different, right? Beliefs have to answer to the world, right? So if I believe there is pizza in the fridge, but in fact there is not pizza in the fridge, I've got a false belief, right? It's in some way defective, right? Um, so knowledge is a kind of belief, right? And intuitively, it ought to be a true belief, right? If I know something, it's a belief I have and it's true. Um, but notice those are only two conditions, right? And I said there were three conditions. So having a true belief that there is pizza in the fridge is not yet knowledge, is not yet knowing that there is pizza in the fridge. Now, why? Because I can have true beliefs by accident, right? And knowledge is not something I should have by accident. So if I have a true belief that there's pizza in the fridge, um, but I came to have that belief um, in a sort of a way that doesn't seem like a reliable way, right? A good way to get knowledge, then that's not going to count as knowledge. So one example, right? Um, right, I didn't look at the pizza. I never bought any pizza, but I just was talking to my astrologer and I said, "What do you think's in the fridge right now?" They said, "Oh, I think you got pizza in the fridge, right?" Um, that's not the sort of like reasoning or the it's not gaining that true belief, even if there accidentally turns out to be pizza in the fridge, you're not gaining that belief in the right way, right? You'd say it's a sort of accidental, right? Same as if I got hit on the head and formed a belief that there was pizza in the fridge and it just turned out to be true. That's sort of like an accidentally true belief. And accidentally true beliefs intuitively say, well, that's not knowledge, right? So for me to know something, it's got to involve me coming to have a true belief in the right way, right? So true beliefs on their own, not knowledge. Knowledge on this traditional account, right? This JTB account, knowledge is a true belief that's justified. And by justified, we mean you have good reasons for it, right? You came to believe it in a good way. And there's lots of, good ways to get knowledge. Maybe I saw the pizza was in the fridge, right? Perception is a form of justification. Maybe someone trustworthy or reliable told me that there's pizza in the fridge, right? And that's another kind of uh, justification, right? Just reliable testimony. Maybe I remember I put it in there. Often, memory is a form of justification, right? And so on. You can think of there's all sorts of different ways we, right, obtain true beliefs, and some of those are like good ways to do it, and those are the justified. And being a little deliberately fuzzy by saying getting knowledge in the right way, right? I'm sort of leaving that open. So just as I said, having a true belief is not yet knowledge if it isn't justified. Um, the same is true of justified beliefs, right? If you have a justified belief, but it turns out that it's not true, well, that's not going to be knowledge either, right? And that happens all the time, right? We come to have beliefs, we come to have them the right way, but the world is a tricky, unpredictable place, and sometimes it still turns out that our justified beliefs aren't true beliefs, right? So suppose I put pizza in the fridge, right? The night before, close the door, go to sleep. I live alone, doors are locked. I have a justified belief that there is pizza in the fridge when I wake up in the morning, right? Um, but it's possible that maybe a rat gets in, right, and eats all the pizza, and there is actually no pizza in the fridge, right? So my belief is false, even though it's justified. Um, in that case, you wouldn't say that I know there's pizza in the fridge, right? Um, even though I have a justified belief, it's not going to be knowledge if that belief is false. Um, now, this is a side note here, right? This this claim that right, justified belief isn't knowledge if it's not true. This is sort of philosophers had just sort of assumed this because they all sort of agreed. Their sort of intuitions agreed that, like, they describe this rat in the fridge situation or some other situation. They all say, "Oh yeah, I wouldn't say you knew, right? If actually isn't any pizza, then of course you don't know there's pizza, right?" Um, but then if they more recently, right, they've philosophers have actually tried to just sort of survey actual people, right, particularly people in different cultures, And there is some variation on this, right? So some people are willing to attribute knowledge to someone who has a false belief, right? But at least in the context of Gettier and at this time, the accepted analysis of knowledge was you need all three. It's got to be a belief that's true, that's justified. I mentioned like our intuitions here, and the philosophers just sort of agreed that, right? Oh yeah, it sounds weird to say that there's pizza in the fridge if there actually isn't. Um, what is going on here? What is the method here? So let's pause for a moment and because you may not be used to this sort of methodology. Um, what it sounds like we're doing and what we actually are doing is I'm describing some sort of situation, right? Oh, right, I put pizza in the fridge, a rat gets in, whatever. I tell a little story. Um, and then I ask you, so in that situation, do I know there's pizza in the fridge or not, right? And we're all supposed to just sort of agree, right? If we're supposed to all say, yeah, in that case, no, you don't, or oh yeah, in that case, you do, right? It's just to sort of assume that it will be unanimous. This method of inquiry is called conceptual analysis, right? It's in analytic philosophy in the 20th century. Um, Folks did a whole lot of this, right? Um, Conceptual analysis of knowledge, of justice, right? Of right and wrong. If you take ethics course, you'll do a lot of this as well, where they describe a situation, right? Trolley problems. Have you ever heard of trolley problems? That's conceptual analysis. Um, um, Philosophy does a lot of it. We're not the only Philosophers aren't the only people to do this. It's used in linguistics as well, right? So in linguistics, right, what they're trying to do is sort of empirically study, figure out what is sort of the implicit grammar of the given language that they're studying, right? So here, English. Uh, and the way they do that is by they use these examples, right? So here on the screen it has like the boy kissed the girl, the boy kissing the girl, right? And sort of these star sentences are ones that pop out to anyone who reads them that speaks the language that that sounds wrong, that's ungrammatical, right? Um, Again, it's this sort of intuition, this gut feeling, right? And more or less everybody agrees on it, right? Anyone who's a competent speaker of English will sort of say, no, B sounds funny, right? And it's a similar technique when we're examining concepts. So we all speak the same language, right? We all share the same concepts, right? Um, in a sense, we must all share the same concepts or very close because without it, we couldn't communicate, right? So if I'm trying to tell you something and I use the word, or I say, go sit in the chair, you must have some concept of what a chair is, right? If we're ever going to communicate. So a lot of our concepts we share. Knowledge is one of those concepts that we all use, right? And so we're generally expected to agree on it for the most part. So what we do is we tell these stories, we test our intuitions, we say, hey, does that count as knowledge? And since we all more or less share the same concept of knowledge, we're all going to agree, here we do, here we don't, right? And these scenarios, these little stories, are precisely designed to sort of push at the edges and see, well, is truth necessary, right? Is knowledge necessary? What if we have, I'm sorry, is justification necessary? What if we have true belief but no justification? What do people say? Everyone says it's not knowledge, right? If I tell a story where there's justified belief but it's not true, what do people say? Everybody says it's not knowledge, right? Um, so let's practice this a little bit before we get to Gettier. All right, so Gettier enters the scene, and the general consensus was, yeah, knowledge is justified true belief. Knowledge is a mental state, right? A belief that's answerable to the world for truth or falsity, and it has to be true, and we have to have come to gain that belief in the right way, right? Um, what Gettier is going to do is he's going to offer two thought experiments. He's going to describe a couple scenarios um, that cast doubt on this JTB analysis of knowledge, right? Um, and we're going to get to his, right? You read those already, but there's actually, he wasn't the first, like everything in philosophy, he actually didn't do it first, right? It seems like Plato did everything first. In this case, Bertrand Russell, Bertrand Russell was like late 19th century, early 20th century um, for most of his work, most of his well-known work in philosophy. Um, and he had actually constructed a same sort of scenario a bit earlier, and it's actually a little easier to understand. So I'm going to start with the Russell case, and then we'll get to the Gettier case. So Russell asks us to imagine, right, that you've got a clock in your living room, and you use that clock every day to determine the time, right? You wake up in the morning, you're getting dressed, and you check the clock, see if you're late for work, right? It's the old kind of clock with the hands on it, right? So you get up this morning, right? You're heading out the door, you look at the clock, it says 9:30, and you believe that it's 9:30, right? Your belief is justified because it's a reliable clock, right? That's always how you've come to know the time, and it's always been right, right, for years. Um, and also your belief is true. It actually is 9:30, right? So we have a justified true belief, right? You believe it's 9:30, it's justified because it's a good clock, and it also happens to be true. It's 9:30. But here's a little thing that Russell throws into the scenario. Suppose that, unbeknownst to you, the clock actually finally broke down, right? It worked for years and then it broke at exactly 9:30 the night before. Right? So when you happen to look at the clock, it just happened to be looking at it at the exact time for it to give you an accurate reading, right? But it wasn't moving at all. It was totally stopped. It was just a total accident. You happened to look at it at 9:30 and it read 9:30 at that moment. So as we said, it's a justified true belief, but the question is, do you know that it's 9:30 a.m.? Um, Russell thinks that we will all agree, no, you do not know that it's 9:30 a.m., right? And if that's the case, right, if you don't know, but you do have a justified true belief, then there's something missing, right? Those three are not sufficient for knowledge. We need something else. Okay, just to drive this home, practice, right, this conceptual analysis, we'll see a couple more cases that Gettier constructs that do essentially the same thing. A scenario where you have justified true belief, but he thinks everyone will agree, well, no, you don't have knowledge in this case. So he begins his article, and again, it's a very short article, right? He just sort of offers a traditional analysis of knowledge. He sort of offers it three times with slight variations. This here is sort of a condensation of those three. But he says, look, S knows that P, if and only if, that's what IFF means, if and only if, right? Which means necessary and sufficient conditions, right? If you have these, you know it, and you have these only, and you know it only if you have these. So these are the three things, right? Now, P is some random whatever proposition. It is 9:30 a.m., right? My car is in the parking lot, right? So Nate knows that his car is in the parking lot, right? If and only if, one, that proposition is true. Two, S believes P, or maybe instead of belief, you could say he accepts P or she or is sure that P, right? Um, again, different ways of saying believes, right? And then three, S is justified in believing P. And then Gettier sort of restates that as maybe having adequate evidence for P, or maybe having the right to be sure that P. But essentially, this is the JTB analysis of knowledge. And he's going to show that this JTB analysis is not sufficient. We can devise circumstances where all those three conditions are met, but S does not know P. And again, what is the evidence that S doesn't know P? Just your gut. It comes from your gut feeling. You are a competent user of the concept knowledge, right? You've grown up using the word, right? And so however you feel about the situation, that's evidence. All right. I have seemingly teleported and changed clothes since the last slide. I had to pause the recording. Something came up. I am finishing it on the last few slides here. So let's talk about the actual Gettier cases that are in Gettier's paper. So the first case, again, he describes a little scenario, and then we're supposed to decide whether in that situation the person has knowledge or not, right? So here we have two characters, Smith and Jones. Now, Smith and Jones have both applied for the same job. Smith, Gettier says, has strong evidence that Jones will get the job. Gettier doesn't say exactly what the nature of that evidence is. You can fill in the blanks yourself. Let's suppose that when Smith was signing in at the desk, he sort of peeked and saw a memo that said, Jones is my friend, give him the job, or something like that, right? So however you fill in the details, the idea is Smith is applying for this job, but he has good reason to believe Jones is going to get it, right? Now, he also happens to know another piece of information, which is that Jones has 10 coins in his pocket. Again, Gettier doesn't fill in the details, but tell the story however you like. suppose Jones and Smith were sitting around in the waiting room waiting, and they were counting their change, right, just to pass the time or something like that. So, um, given this situation as we've described it, we can say that Smith has strong evidence for the belief that the person who will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket, right? Again, because he thinks Jones is going to get the job. He has good evidence that Jones will get the job, good evidence that Jones has 10 coins in his pocket. Um, so we can sort of infer from those two bits of information that the person who gets the job will have 10 coins in their pocket, right? So he is justified in this belief, right? He has, again, as good evidence as you can get. Again, say just, he saw a memo from the president of the company or something like that. Maybe perceptual information about the number of coins in Jones' pocket. So perfectly good evidence, right? Justified in those. And from those two bits of information, he has made a logical inference that is perfectly sound, right? So even though he made that extra leap from the two propositions that Jones will get the job and Jones has 10 coins to the person who gets the job will have 10 coins, that inference is perfectly good too. You're perfectly justified in making that kind of inference. So we have a justified belief on the part of Smith that the person who gets the job has 10 coins in their pocket. Right? Now you can probably guess what's going to happen next. It turns out, right, big surprise, Smith gets the job after all, right? Maybe the person who was hiring didn't get the note from the CEO, right? Or maybe maybe they ignored it, right? Who knows, right? But accidents happen, mistakes happen, miscommunications happen. However it happened, despite, right, that evidence that he had that Jones would get the job, turns out Smith gets the job, right? Um, and another little happy accident, turns out that Smith had 10 coins in his pocket too, right? Um, for whatever reason, right? Maybe since we supposed that him and Jones were counting the coins in their pockets for fun, right? Um, maybe it turned out that Smith had an extra coin in his pocket that he missed or something like that. Excuse me, I had to pause for a garbage truck. But so where we are in the story, right, is it turns out even though Smith got the job instead of Jones, right, uh, his belief, which was justified, turns out to also actually be true, right? Again, it's sort of by accident it turns out true because this belief was just whoever gets the job will have 10 coins in their pocket. Turns out he gets the job. Turns out he had 10 coins in his pocket, right? Um, so now, given that scenario, right, we have a justified true belief. We came by the belief in the right way. It turned out to be true. But Gettier wants us to ask ourselves, do you think that that counts as knowledge, right? Did Smith know that the person who get the job would have 10 coins in their pocket, right? Um, and Gettier thinks we will all agree, no, that's not knowledge, right? Something went wrong there. Maybe you want to write a paper about what you think went wrong. Maybe you deny that the belief was justified, right? Maybe you think, now, because like certainly Descartes wouldn't agree, right, from the beginning with this whole scenario, right? Descartes would say this is all very dubious, right? Because all of this was sort of fallible, right? His justified belief certainly could have turned out false, right? And in fact, sort of one of the premises leading up to it did turn out false, right? Because one of the premises was that Jones would get the job. Now, the belief in question that turned out to be true, right, was derived from that and turned out to be true. So something went wrong here. I don't think we have knowledge, right? But Gettier's saying, yeah, we don't have knowledge, and that means something's wrong with just justified true belief as a definition of knowledge here, right? And we're not going to have time in this class to do too much time analyzing what went wrong, right? There's a whole literature on it. You don't have to read that literature. You're encouraged to, think on it yourself and try to figure out for yourself what went wrong. Write a paper on it. That's fine. Right? But so this is sort of the general structure of the Gettier case. We'll cover one more, and the Russell case with the clock, similar structure where you have a justified belief, right? And then you have kind of an accident where that belief would, in most cases, turn out false, right? And so that's not a problem. A false belief is obviously not knowledge. No one thinks a false belief is knowledge, right? Or for the most part. But then in the Gettier cases, you have another accident that ends up making the belief turn out true in the end, right? And it's this double accident that makes us think, okay, yeah, I guess it's a justified true belief, but it doesn't feel like knowledge to me, right? It doesn't feel like he knew that the person who would get the job would have 10 coins in their pocket. Let's try the next Gettier case, just to drive the point home. So here we still have two characters, Smith and Jones, right? And let's say that Smith has strong evidence that Jones owns a Ford, right? And again, Gettier doesn't sort of fill in the details. There's lots of ways you might have evidence that someone owns a Ford, right? Let's suppose that Smith saw Jones driving a Ford all the time, right? And so he said, okay, I guess, yeah, Jones owns a Ford, right? So he's got this one belief, right? It's a justified belief that Jones owns a Ford. From that belief, he uses another sort of justified method for deriving beliefs. He uses logic. Now, the rules of logic say that if I have any one proposition, like Jones owns a Ford, I can slap an or next to it and then any other proposition I want, right? Why? Because or statements in logic are true just so long as one half of them is true, right? So Nate is wearing a blue shirt is true, so I can derive from that Nate is wearing a blue shirt, or Nate was born in Minnesota, right? I wasn't born in Minnesota. It doesn't matter. The statement's true because I'm wearing a blue shirt, right? One half of them is true, and that's all you need for an or statement is for one half of it to be true. So since Smith, right, has good reason to believe Jones owns a Ford, we can slap anything on the other side of an or statement, and that'll be a justified statement as well, right? So Jones owns a Ford, or Brown is in Barcelona, right? He derives that proposition. He doesn't know if Brown is in Barcelona. He has no idea where Brown is, right? But because he has a justified belief that Jones owns a Ford, right? That's a perfectly good, this or statement is also justified. Okay, hope that makes sense. We can talk about it Wednesday if you're still confused. Sometimes this version confuses people. That's why I'm giving you 3 versions. If any one of them confuses you, like hopefully one of them will make sense to you, right? And that's all you need. Okay, so, right, Smith has this justified belief that either Jones owns a Ford or Brown is in Barcelona. Now, here's the first little accident, right? Turns out Jones doesn't own that Ford. He's been renting it the whole time, right? Or leasing it or something like that. So normally that would just be, okay, we got a normal false belief, obviously not knowledge. But as it turns out, Brown actually is in Barcelona, right? So, again, because it's an or statement, one of the halves is true. The Brown and Barcelona half is true. It's not the half we thought would be true, but it turns out it is, right? We end up with a true belief, right? And as we already said it was justified. So, again, we have a justified true belief, and yet it would be weird to say that Smith knows that Jones is renting the Ford or Brown is in Barcelona. Sorry, that Smith knows that Jones owns a Ford or Brown is in Barcelona, right? Even though it's justified true belief, it feels weird. And again, that's all the evidence we have. We're not analyzing why it feels weird yet. If you want to do that in a paper, you can. But it feels weird to say that he knows that, even though he has a justified true belief, right? So, once again, a justified true belief, but no knowledge. So again, we have, at this point, hopefully a recognizable formula. You take a justified belief, add an accident that makes that belief that it should turn out false, but then add another accident that makes it turn out true in the end, right? And you got yourself a Gettier case. So again, what is the point of this? It doesn't necessarily show that justified true belief has nothing to do with knowledge. Justified true belief might still be necessary for knowledge, right? But what it is showing is that justified true belief isn't sufficient for knowledge, right? You may need to add something else on top of it, right, to get us around these Gettier cases. So something went wrong in these Gettier cases, right? And it's been the job of epistemologists for the ensuing decades after Gettier to figure out what goes wrong in these cases so that we can add, right, a new condition on knowledge, a fourth condition that gets these cases right and makes it so that we don't have knowledge in those cases, right? What would that be? Again, there's lots of options out there. I'm sort of leaving it open so that you can, if you want to write a paper on it, do that yourself. But that is the Gettier case, right? Very different notion of knowledge than Descartes, right? For Descartes, for something to be knowledge, it has to be just totally infallible, totally tied down to a guaranteed foundation, right, of knowledge. Here we're playing a little more fast and loose. It's more like how we use the term knowledge in our everyday speech, right? Again, like, yeah, I know my car's in the parking lot, even though, yeah, I guess it's possible it's stolen, right? You can have knowledge and it's still, there's a potential for it to be a mistake, and Descartes wouldn't buy that, right? But I think nowadays most of us buy that. So Gettier's saying, okay, well, what are those conditions? What makes it the case that I know my car's in the parking lot? And normally, before Gettier, people said, well, I have a justified belief about it. I parked it there an hour ago. Usually it doesn't go anywhere. Cars don't usually get stolen, right? It's pretty rare. So yeah, I'm justified in believing it's there. And if it turns out to be true, boom, you've got knowledge, right? And Gettier's saying, no, that's not enough. We need something else. We need more than that. So that's Gettier. And that is the end of the epistemology little unit for us. Each of these units, again, this is a quick survey sample of like, here's some kinds of philosophy that you might find interesting or not. And if you don't, great, don't write a paper on it. Write on something else, right? But I'm just exposing you to a bunch, a little taster, little samplers, in hopes that just one of these readings really maybe catches your imagination or your interest, and you might want to delve a little deeper in that and write a paper on it. So I will see you next week, or I will see you Wednesday, if you like. All right.